If I told you that 5 minutes a day could measurably lower your risk of dementia, you'd be right to be skeptical. That sounds like exactly the kind of oversimplified claim this channel usually pushes back on. But in this case, the research genuinely supports it, and I want to walk you through exactly what the study found, why the amount of exercise required is so much smaller than most people assume, what's actually happening in your brain when you move your body, and how to realistically build this into a day that probably already feels full. This isn't about becoming an athlete or overhauling your life. It's about understanding just how low the bar actually is for your brain to start benefiting. Let's start with the research itself, because the specific numbers here matter. A study led by researchers at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health followed a group of adults with a median age of 63 over an average of about 4.5 years. Participants wore activity trackers, allowing researchers to measure their actual physical activity rather than relying on self-reported estimates, which tend to be far less accurate. Comparing people who engaged in no structured physical activity at all to those who managed even a small amount, the researchers found that just 35 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity was associated with a 41% lower risk of developing dementia over the study period compared to doing none at all. To put that in context, 35 minutes a week works out to exactly 5 minutes a day. And the benefit didn't stop there. For every additional 30 minutes of weekly activity beyond that starting point, researchers observed a further 4% reduction in dementia risk, meaning the benefit continued to grow with more activity. But the most dramatic jump in protection came specifically from going from zero activity to even a small, consistent amount. This finding lines up with a separate, larger body of research using data from the long-running Framingham Heart Study, which has followed generations of participants since the early 1970s. That research looked at physical activity levels during early adulthood, midlife, and later life, and found that higher physical activity during midlife and late life specifically was associated with a 41 to 45% lower risk of all-cause dementia, with similar protective patterns observed for Alzheimer's disease specifically. Interestingly, this research suggested that activity during midlife and later life mattered more for dementia risk than activity levels earlier in adulthood, which is genuinely encouraging if you feel like your more active years are behind you. The research suggests it's genuinely not too late for exercise to meaningfully influence your risk. So why does this work? What is exercise actually doing inside your brain that produces this kind of protective effect? Let's go through the mechanisms researchers currently understand, because this isn't just a statistical correlation without explanation. There's real, measurable biology behind it. The first mechanism is blood flow. Exercise increases blood flow throughout the body, including to the brain, delivering more oxygen and nutrients to brain tissue and supporting the removal of metabolic waste products. Chronic reduced blood flow to the brain is specifically implicated in vascular dementia, one of the major subtypes of dementia, which is why exercise's cardiovascular benefits translate fairly directly into brain protective benefits for this particular type. The second mechanism involves a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, often abbreviated BDNF. Exercise has been shown to increase BDNF production, and this protein supports the growth of new neurons and strengthens the connections between existing ones, particularly in a brain region called the hippocampus, which plays a central role in memory formation and is one of the areas most affected early in Alzheimer's disease. Higher BDNF levels are associated with better memory performance and, over time, may help build a kind of cognitive resilience against age-related decline. The third mechanism is inflammation reduction. Chronic, low-grade inflammation throughout the body, including in the brain, is increasingly understood to play a role in the development of several forms of dementia. Regular physical activity has a well-documented anti-inflammatory effect, which may partly explain its protective association with brain health over time, similar to the anti-inflammatory benefits we've discussed in the context of heart and kidney health on this channel. The fourth mechanism is one of the most interesting and recent additions to this picture. A study published in the journal Cell, using detailed research in mice, found that exercise can strengthen the blood-brain barrier, the protective boundary that controls what substances are allowed to pass from the bloodstream into brain tissue. A weakened or leaky blood-brain barrier has been linked to neurodegeneration, potentially allowing harmful substances and inflammatory triggers to reach brain tissue that would normally be kept out. While this specific finding comes from animal research and hasn't yet been confirmed at the same level of detail in humans, it offers a compelling potential explanation for part of why exercise appears so consistently protective against cognitive decline across so many different types of studies. Now, an important clarification, because I don't want to overstate what any of this means. None of this research shows that exercise guarantees you won't develop dementia, and none of it applies to people who already have a dementia diagnosis in the same preventive sense. What the research does show is a consistent, meaningful association between physical activity and reduced risk, observed across multiple large, well-designed studies using different populations and different methods, which is about as strong a signal as population-level health research typically produces for a lifestyle factor. Dementia has multiple contributing causes, including genetics, and exercise is one meaningfully modifiable piece of a much larger picture, not a guarantee in either direction. Let's talk about what actually counts as moderate to vigorous physical activity, because this term sounds more demanding than the actual bar really is. Moderate intensity generally means your heart rate and breathing increase noticeably, but you can still hold a conversation, just not comfortably sing. Brisk walking at a pace that feels purposeful rather than leisurely easily qualifies. Vigorous intensity means you're breathing hard enough that conversation becomes difficult, which could include a faster-paced walk uphill, cycling at a moderate effort, or swimming laps. The study we discussed didn't require vigorous exercise specifically. Moderate activity, consistently accumulated, was enough to produce the protective association researchers observed. This matters enormously for how realistic this actually is to implement, because a brisk 5-minute walk done daily technically meets this threshold entirely on its own. Let's talk about realistically fitting this into your day, because knowing the research matters less than actually using it. 5 minutes is short enough that it doesn't require special clothing, a gym membership, or a dedicated block of your schedule. A brisk walk around your block, up and down a hallway, or even around your own living room while on a phone call all count. Splitting it up works too. The research is based on total weekly minutes, not one continuous session, so 3 short walks of similar total length throughout your day can add up to the same benefit as one longer session. If you already have a daily habit that involves any movement, like walking to get the mail or doing light housework, simply picking up the pace briefly during part of that existing activity can be enough to shift it from light to moderate intensity, which is exactly the intensity threshold associated with the protective effect in this research. For anyone wanting to build beyond the minimum, it's worth remembering that additional activity continued providing additional protection in this research. The 4% risk reduction for every additional 30 minutes weekly means that building up toward general physical activity guidelines, commonly cited as around 150 minutes of moderate activity per week, would be expected to provide meaningfully more protection than the 5-minute minimum alone. But the most important takeaway from this specific research isn't more is only slightly better. It's that the single biggest jump in protective benefit came from simply going from 0 to some activity, which is genuinely good news for anyone who currently does little to no structured exercise and has felt like the bar to get any benefit at all was too high to realistically reach. Let's connect this back to a video we made previously on this channel, the 6 exercises for strength and balance after 70. That routine and this 5-minute walking research aren't competing recommendations. They complement each other well, since the strength and balance routine targets muscle, bone, and fall prevention specifically, while the brisk walking discussed today targets cardiovascular health and the brain-specific mechanisms we just covered. If you're already doing the 6 exercise routine, adding a short brisk walk on top, even just 5 minutes, layers a meaningfully different category of benefit on top of what you're already building. Let's cover a few myths, since they tend to either discourage people from starting or lead them toward an unnecessarily complicated approach. Myth 1. If I can't commit to a real workout, there's no point. As this research clearly shows, that's backwards. The largest single jump in protective benefit came from going from no activity to a small amount, not from optimizing an already established routine. Myth 2. Only intense exercise counts for brain health. Moderate intensity, like a brisk walk, was sufficient to produce the association found in this research. Vigorous exercise wasn't a requirement. Myth 3. It's too late to start benefiting if I'm already older. The Framingham research specifically found that activity during midlife and late life carried strong protective associations, arguably more so than activity earlier in life, which directly contradicts the idea that this window has closed. And myth 4, this means exercise will prevent dementia entirely. As covered, this is an association that meaningfully reduces risk, not a guarantee, and dementia involves multiple contributing factors beyond physical activity alone. I also want to mention that exercise isn't the only modifiable factor worth knowing about, even though it's the focus of today's video. Sleep quality, social connection, hearing health, and diet patterns like the Mediterranean or Mind diet have all shown meaningful associations with dementia risk in separate research, and several of these might make good topics for follow-up videos on this channel if there's interest. Exercise stands out, partly because the research behind it is so consistent, and because, as we've covered today, the actual amount required to see a measurable association is so much smaller than most people assume. To bring this together, a Johns Hopkins study found that just 35 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity per week, the equivalent of 5 minutes a day, was associated with a 41% lower risk of developing dementia compared to no activity at all, with additional activity providing further, if smaller, additional protection. This lines up with decades of data from the Framingham Heart Study showing similarly strong associations between physical activity and reduced dementia risk. And newer research is beginning to explain why, through mechanisms including improved blood flow, increased BDNF, supporting memory-related brain regions, reduced inflammation, and a potentially strengthened blood-brain barrier. None of this requires a gym, special equipment, or a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. It requires roughly 5 minutes of purposeful movement most days, which is about as achievable a health recommendation as exists in the research right now. If this video was useful, the most helpful thing you can do is actually try it starting today, and share this with someone who's been telling themselves they don't have time to start. Subscribe for more evidence-based health content, and I'll see you in the next one.